There is a social media joke I see from time to time that as much as Americans are taxed now, we had a revolution over a small tax on tea, which is partially true as all good jokes are. But the thing is, it wasn't about the tax on the tea. It was the tax itself that was the problem. Obviously, the big line during the pre-Revolutionary War years was no taxation without representation, meaning Americans wanted the authority to pass its own laws or have representation in Parliament. Prior to the conclusion of the Seven Years' War, there was little, if any, reason to believe that one day the American colonies would undertake a revolution in an effort to create an independent nation state. As a part of the empire, the colonies were protected from foreign invasion by the British military. In return, the colonists paid relatively few taxes and could engage in domestic economic activity without much interference from the British government. For the most part, the colonists were only asked to adhere to regulations concerning foreign trade. In a series of acts passed by Parliament during the 17th century, the Navigation Acts required that all trade within the empire be conducted on ships which were constructed, owned, and largely manned by British citizens. Certain enumerated goods, whether exported or imported by the colonies, had to be shipped through England regardless of its final port destination. The British victory over the French during the Seven Years' War had come at a high price. Domestic taxes had been raised substantially during the war, and total government debt had increased nearly twofold. Furthermore, the British had decided in 1763 to place a standing army of 10,000 men in North America. Furthermore, the British had decided in 1763 to place a standing army of 10,000 men in North America. The bulk of these forces were stationed in newly acquired territory to enforce its new land policy in the West. Forts were to be built, which would become the new centers of trade with the Indians. The British decided that the Americans should share the cost of the military buildup in the colonies. The reason seemed obvious. Taxes were significantly higher in Britain than in the colonies. One estimate suggests that the per capita tax burden in the colonies ranged from 2 to 4% of that in Britain. It was time in the British view that the Americans began to pay a larger share of the expenses of the empire. Accordingly, a series of tax acts were passed by Parliament, the revenue from which was to be used to help pay for the standing army in America. The first was the Sugar Act of 1764. Proposed by England's Prime Minister, the act lowered tariff rates on non-British products from the West Indies, as well as strengthened their collection. It was hoped this would reduce the incentive for smuggling and thereby increase tariff revenue. The following year, Parliament passed the Stamp Act that had imposed a tax commonly used in England. The following year, Parliament passed the Stamp Act that imposed a tax commonly used in England. It required stamps for a broad range of legal documents, as well as newspapers and pamphlets. While the colonial stamp duties were less than those in England, they were expected to generate enough revenue to finance a substantial portion of the cost of the new standing army. The same year, passage of the Quartering Act imposed essentially a tax in kind by requiring the colonists to provide British military units with housing, provisions, and transportation. In 1767, the Townshend Acts imposed tariffs upon a variety of imported goods and established a board of customs commissioners in the colonies to collect the revenue. American opposition to these acts was expressed initially in a variety of peaceful forms. While they did not have representation in Parliament, the colonists did attempt to exert some influence in it through petition and lobbying. However, it was the economic boycott that became by far the most effective means of altering the new British economic policies. In 1765, representatives from 9 colonies met at the Stamp Act Congress in New York and organized a boycott of imported English goods. The boycott was so successful in reducing trade that English merchants lobbied Parliament for the repeal of the new taxes. Parliament soon responded to the political pressure. During 1766, it repealed both the Stamp Act and Sugar Acts. In response to the Townshend Acts of 1767, a second major boycott started in 1768 in Boston and New York and subsequently spread to other cities, leading Parliament in 1770 to repeal all of the Townshend duties except the one on tea. In addition, Parliament decided at the same time not to renew the Quartering Act. With these actions taken by Parliament, the Americans appeared to have successfully overturned the new British post-war tax agenda. However, Parliament had not given up what it believed to be its right to tax the colonies. On the same day it repealed the Stamp Act, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, stating that the British government had the full power and authority to make laws governing the colonies in all cases whatsoever, including taxation. Policies, not principles, had been overturned. My question is, if the British from the start of the colonies had these taxes and laws in place, do Americans declare independence? I doubt the Revolutionary War happens, as, when you are used to something, it just becomes your normal and you're less likely to question it. To me, what happened was that the colonists had lived for multiple generations and really were left alone to do as they wish. True freedom from a centralized government. The colonists governed themselves, set up state legislatures, and really built a society. Then the British came in too late trying to tell the colonists what to do, implemented the aforementioned taxes and other bills. It is similar to letting a kid do whatever they want their whole lives, then trying to start to discipline them at 15. You can't do that. You have to discipline them from the beginning. It's too late to start at 15. Now, we have grown up with extremely high taxes: income tax, property tax, payroll tax, sales tax. Being taxed to death has become normal and just something the average American accepts. Of course, the founding fathers would not have accepted the size and scope of our federal government the same way they would not have been happy with the amount of taxes and the lack of freedom. But we are used to an ever-expanding centralized federal government since the Woodrow Wilson administration. The founding fathers still had the argument of taxation without representation, but without the average person feeling the effects of British policy in their lives directly, they might not have filled the ranks of soldiers. It is said that a third of the colonists supported the British, one-third for independence, and one-third were neutral. Knowing that, I doubt we fill the ranks and get enthusiasm for a war had those British taxes and rules always been there. As history played out, it still took over a decade for British implementing laws for the colonists to finally rebel. It was not a quick process. Most colonists wanted reconciliation right up until the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. There is obviously a limit to how far government can go before the average person has had enough. In America, that is laid out in the Declaration of Independence. So we may never know, as this last part is just speculation. But we have to be very careful in our personal lives and society as a whole about what we accept and become used to, as it most likely will never go away, but only get worse.